Today I'm going to talk about the Authorization Code grant. This is a common OAuth grant that is useful when you have a client that needs to get access to protected resources. In this case, the client is represented by the mobile device, and the protected resource is the to-do API. There are three components to the server-side aspects of the Authorization Code grant. But first, it's worthwhile to think about things in two different dimensions. The first is what components of the system are client-side, essentially the mobile device, and server-side. And the difference is that with server-side components, you have a lot more control. They can safely hold secrets. You can update deployments to them very easily. And so in general, you want to keep as much security infrastructure as you can server-side. The other thing to think about is, where do credentials live? Obviously, the client needs to have credentials. This would be something like a username and password. And then the OAuth and user management platform does as well, because that is what is going to verify the authenticity of those credentials. It's going to check to see that the password matches. It's going to make sure that MFA, if it's required, occurs. But you can see here that the application backend and the to-do API, the other parts of our system that are server-side, don't have any reason at all to know about credentials. They're going to get a token, and that is what is going to determine whether or not the client can access the resources. So let's talk about how the Authorization Code grant works in detail. First, the client visits the OAuth server, and it makes a GET request. Then the OAuth server sends back a form. Then the client passes the credentials. So that would be the username and password, or any other form of credentials that are acceptable. The OAuth and user management platform checks against the user's database and verifies the identity of the user behind the client. It authenticates the client, in other words. Then it passes a redirect to the client, and that is done with a 302, and there is an authorization code passed along. And that authorization code is just a random alphanumeric string. It is time-bound, so it's only good for a certain period of time, and it's one-time use. The client then passes the authorization code to the application backend. And this is an important part of the Authorization Code grant. There has to be this application backend. The application backend takes the code that's provided by the client and a client secret, which it can hold safely, and presents that to the OAuth system. It presents some additional parameters as well: the redirect URI, the client ID, and possibly some other information. The important thing to know is that the application backend, because it's server-side, because you can control it, is more secured than the client code, which you really can't trust, to be honest with you. We take the authorization code, the client secret, and some other things, pass it to the OAuth system, and we get back a token. That token is sent back to the client. The client, after it safely stores those valuable tokens, can now present them to the resource server, to the to-do API. That is the end goal of the Authorization Code grant. We want to be able to take a token which represents, but is not equivalent to, the credentials that were originally presented by the user to the OAuth system, and take that token and present it to protected resources. In this case, the to-do API, but it could be many other APIs and many other services. In this case, the to-do API is now going to send to-dos down as JSON. The client can present them as needed. Some people wonder why the Authorization Code grant is introduced at all. After all, we just handed the token to the client. Wouldn't it be simpler to have the token be returned from the OAuth system to the client directly? And there are a couple of reasons why it makes sense to go through the extra step of the Authorization Code and having the exchange happen on the server side between the application backend and the OAuth system. The first is the secret. Clients, such as mobile devices or browsers, can't safely hold a secret. The second is the authorization code, because it's one-time use, is less valuable, so that even if the client does get access to it or someone intercepts it, it's going to be less valuable than a token would be. Third, when the application backend retrieves the token from the OAuth system using the authorization code and the client secret and the other parameters, you have some architectural flexibility. You can choose to send it down to the client. You could choose to keep it in the application backend. And if you send the token to the client directly, which essentially is the implicit grant, you lose that architectural flexibility. That is a short overview of the flow of the authorization code grant. Thank you.